The ballroom lights caught the marble floor, the crystal glasses, the silver tray dripping from a melting ice swan. Marcus stood in a charcoal suit, no name tag, hand extended toward the host. She looked at his hand like it was something spilled on her dress. "I don't shake hands with people who weren't introduced to me," she said, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear, and turned her back. He lowered his hand and stayed exactly where he was. Some people know this feeling. Minutes later, the microphone clicked on, and the host's own event coordinator leaned into it and read his full name out loud to 700 guests. Chapter 1. Beasts or the Hand. The Belgrave's ballroom smelled of orchids and candle wax, and the string trio near the windows was working through something slow and forgettable. Marcus Odom stood just inside the entrance for a moment, taking the room the way he took every room. Corners first, exits second, faces last. He crossed the marble floor alone, no assistant trailing him, no name tag pinned to his lapel, just a charcoal suit, a clean white shirt, and shoes that had walked into rooms far less forgiving than this one. Eleanor Voss stood near the center of a small circle, mid-story, her hand slicing the air to punctuate something about a regatta in Newport. She had the kind of laugh that carried on purpose. Marcus waited for a break in the sentence. When one came, he stepped forward and offered his hand. "Good evening, Marcus Odom." Eleanor's eyes moved from his shoes to his face, slow enough that everyone in the circle noticed the pause. She did not take the hand. "I'm sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "Do I know you?" "Not yet," Marcus said. "I was hoping to introduce myself." "Were you?" She turned half a step toward the woman beside her, as if inviting her into a private joke. "You know, I really thought this event had a guest list." A ripple of laughter went through the circle. Small, polite, deniable. The woman in emerald earrings looked at the floor. The man with the wine glass studied his drink like it had asked him a question. Marcus's hand stayed where it was for another beat. Then he lowered it. "I was invited," he said, "by name." "How wonderful for you," Eleanor said, and turned back to her circle, closing it the way a door closes. Without slamming, without needing to, no one said anything else to him. No one had to. The four people in that circle had already agreed on something without a single word passing between them, and Marcus had watched it happen in real time, the way he'd watched it happen 100 times before, in 100 rooms that looked almost exactly like this one. He adjusted his cuff. It was a small motion, automatic, the kind of thing a man does when he needs his hands to be doing something other than clenching. He did not leave. Instead, he walked the perimeter of the ballroom, past the ice sculpture already beginning to weep onto its silver tray, past two men debating a stock split in low, urgent voices. He took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray, more for the weight of it in his hand than any thirst. His phone buzzed once against his hip. He didn't check it. Whatever it was could wait until he'd finished doing what he'd actually come here to do, which was not, despite how the last 90 seconds had looked, to introduce himself to Eleanor Voss. That would come later. He found a spot near the edge of the room, close enough to watch, far enough to be forgotten. A waiter passed without offering him anything. A woman near the bar glanced at him twice, the second time longer than the first, and then found somewhere else to look. Marcus watched Eleanor's circle reform, laughing again, already 3 sentences past him. He had been in this exact position before, invisible in a room built to notice everyone, and he had learned, a long time ago, that the worst thing a man could do in that position was leave. So he stayed. Chapter 2, Geometry. By the time dinner was called, Marcus had noticed the shift in the room, the way a sailor notices a change in wind, before anyone else feels it on their skin. A guard near the champagne bar who hadn't moved in 20 minutes suddenly drifted toward the service corridor. Another took up a position by the east doors, radio clipped his shoulder, not looking at anything in particular, and looking at everything. A waiter who'd been circling the room in wide, generous loops began routing around Marcus specifically, the way water roots around a stone. Nobody had said a word to him. Nobody needed to. He had spent 30 years learning to read the architecture of a room, and the architecture had just rearranged itself around him. He was seated at a table near the back, close to a swinging door that let out a burst of kitchen noise every few minutes. 4 other place cards sat around him. Names he didn't recognize, and by the time their owners arrived, wouldn't be given the chance to. 2 couples took their seats, glanced at him, and reorganized themselves without discussion, leaving 2 empty chairs as a kind of buffer zone. No hands offered, no names exchanged. A woman in a blue dress angled her chair a few degrees, just enough that her shoulder faced him instead of her attention. Marcus unfolded his napkin and set it across his lap. He straightened the fork, the knife, the spoon, until they sat in a line so precise it could have been measured. It was a habit from a different life, a way of putting order into a room that had none, one small, controllable thing at a time. The centerpiece in front of him was a low arrangement of white peonies, close enough that he could smell them under the noise of the kitchen doors. He noted absently that no one had bothered to ask if he wanted the seat facing the wall. From 2 tables over, Eleanor's voice rose just enough to carry, pitched for an audience, not a conversation. "Every year it's something," she said, "to no one in particular, and everyone at once. Next year I'm doubling the security budget. We're apparently attracting strays." A retired federal auditor at the next table, a stiff-backed man in his 70s who hadn't touched his wine, set down his fork hard enough that it rang against the china. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His wife put a hand over his and gave the smallest shake of her head. Marcus heard all of it. The Belgrave's ballroom had been built to carry a string quartet from one end to the other, and it carried insults with the same generosity. He did not turn around. A waiter finally approached his table. "Something to drink, sir?" "Water," Marcus said. "Thank you." The waiter left. Marcus watched him go, watched the small choreography of the room continue without him, the way conversations rose and fell, the way glances moved toward his table and away again, quick, deniable, the kind of looking that could always be denied later as not looking. His phone rang against his hip, this time long enough that he couldn't ignore it. He glanced at the screen, a name he recognized, and silenced it without answering. Whatever it was, it would keep. He was not going to take a call at this table, in this room, where every motion he made was already being catalogued by someone he couldn't see. He folded his hands instead and let the ringing stop on its own. Across the room, Eleanor Voss laughed at something loud and bright, and the sound reached him clean and whole, the way sound travels easily toward the person it's meant to reach. Marcus reached for his water and drank slowly, and did not look up again until the lights over the stage began to shift, signaling the start of the evening's remarks. The retired auditor caught his eye once, briefly, across the gap between their tables. Marcus gave a small nod. The old man returned it, then looked away, as if the gesture had cost him something he wasn't ready to spend in front of his wife. Chapter 3, Standards. Marcus's phone buzzed again as the lights over the stage steadied into their pre-speech glow. This time he answered, stepping away from the table toward a quiet stretch of wall near the service corridor, phone pressed close to keep his voice low. "Go ahead," he said. He listened for a moment, then, "No, hold the transition memo until Thursday. I want legal to see the board packet before it goes to Whitfield." A pause. Clearance on that stays with me. Nobody above the line touches it tonight. He ended the call and slid the phone back into his jacket before anyone could ask who Whitfield was or what a transition memo had to do with a man nobody at this gala could place. Nobody asked, nobody was listening except the room itself, and the room had already decided he wasn't worth the effort. He stood there another moment, phone dark in his hand, and let the small satisfaction of the call settle before he let it go. Whatever happened in the next hour, the parts of his life that had nothing to do with Eleanor Voss were still running exactly on schedule. That mattered more to him than most people would have guessed. He returned to his seat just as Eleanor Voss climbed the 3 steps to the stage in a dress that caught every light in the building. The applause was warm, rehearsed, the kind that starts before anyone's sure what they're clapping for. "Thank you all for being here," Eleanor began, her voice filling the ballroom the way perfume fills a room, inescapable, deliberate. "This gala represents everything the Camden Group stands for: legacy, excellence." She let the word sit a moment before she picked it back up. "Standards." Scattered applause, a few nods from the front tables. "Excellence isn't inclusive by nature," Eleanor continued. "It's selective. And that selectiveness is exactly what separates organizations like ours from everyone else scrambling for a seat at the table." Marcus sat perfectly still, hands flat against the tablecloth, watching her the way a man watches weather rolling in. Not with panic, with calculation. 2 tables away, a woman in her 50s set down her wine glass harder than she meant to. She'd spent 11 years managing client accounts for the Camden Group before she'd left. Quietly, without a severance package, without an exit interview anyone bothered to schedule. She didn't say anything now either. She just gripped her napkin until her knuckles went pale and stared at the stage like she was watching a rerun of something she'd already lived through once. Her husband leaned toward her, said something too low for Marcus to catch, and she shook her head once, sharply, and reached for her wine instead. Eleanor talked for 11 more minutes. She named clients, she named numbers, she did not name the 3 executives who'd resigned under her in the last year and a half, or the complaints that had gone nowhere, or the word fit she'd used every time someone asked her why. When she finished, the applause came louder this time, relieved to have something to do with its hands. Eleanor descended the stage the way a woman descends a staircase when she already knows every eye in the room is on her, and started walking, not toward the bar, not toward her circle, but straight across the ballroom floor, toward Marcus's table. He didn't rise yet. He watched her get closer, watched the deliberate angle of her stride, and felt something settle into place in his chest. Not fear, not anger, recognition. The particular stillness of a man who has been waiting for a door to finally open, and has just heard the hinge. He set his water glass down without a sound. A busboy clearing the next table over paused for half a second too long, sensing something in the air the way people sense weather before it's visible, a pressure change nobody could name yet, but everybody in the vicinity had started to feel. He gathered his tray and moved on quickly, not wanting to be standing there when it broke. Marcus did not stand yet. He let her close the last of the distance on her own terms, the way he'd let her do everything else tonight. Chapter 4, 10 minutes. Eleanor stopped 2 feet from the table, close enough that Marcus could smell her perfume over the candle wax, close enough that the 4 or 5 tables around them went quiet without being told to. He rose to meet her and offered his hand a 3rd time. "Miss Voss, my name is Marcus Odom. I've been trying to introduce myself all evening. I believe we have some business to discuss." Eleanor looked at the hand the way a person looks at a stain they're deciding whether to mention. She did not take it. "Business," she said. "You and I have no business. I don't know who told you that you could approach me 3 times in one night, but let me be very clear. Her voice dropped, but it carried anyway. Pitched, to reach exactly as far as she wanted it to. You don't belong in this room. You never did. And I have been more patient with you than you deserve. A young woman 2 tables back, 26 or so, in a navy dress that didn't quite match the room's price tag, lifted her phone below the edge of the tablecloth and started recording. She worked in the Camden Group's marketing department 3rd floor and had spent the better part of a year drafting press copy about the company's commitment to inclusive excellence. She'd typed that phrase herself more than once without ever quite believing it. Nobody noticed her lift the phone. Nobody was looking anywhere but at Eleanor and the man whose hand was still hanging in the air between them. "Take your cheap suit," Eleanor said, "and whatever fantasy brought you through those doors, and leave, now, before I have security walk you out in front of everyone." Marcus held his hand there, 1 second, 2, long enough that the silence around them stopped being awkward and started being something else, something the whole cluster of nearby tables could feel pressing against their collarbones. 5 seconds is a long time when a room is watching. Long enough for a heart to beat 7 or 8 times, long enough, if a person were paying attention, to notice that the man being threatened wasn't flinching. Marcus lowered his hand.
"I understand," he said. 2 words, quiet, final, not a surrender.
He turned and walked back to his table, and his shoes made no sound against the carpet. Behind him, he heard Eleanor exhale, not quite a laugh, but close enough to one that a few people near her took it as permission to smile. He sat. He folded his napkin, unfolded it, set it back on his lap. His hands were steady. That at least hadn't changed all night. His phone lit up on the table, screen bright against the white cloth. He glanced down, a message, half of it visible, before he turned the phone face down again. "Ready when you are, mister." He didn't need to read the rest. He knew what it said. He'd written the plan himself 3 weeks ago, and every piece of it had just clicked into place exactly on schedule, whether Eleanor Voss understood that or not.
He checked his watch. 10 minutes.
Across the room, the string quartet finished whatever they'd been playing and went still. A moment later, the overhead chandeliers began to dim, section by section, the way a theatre dims before curtain. Marcus watched the light drain out of the ballroom and did not move. Somewhere near the stage, a man in a dark suit stepped up to the podium and adjusted the microphone. Eleanor hadn't noticed yet. She was still talking, still laughing, still certain that whatever had just happened at that table was already over. Marcus thought, not for the first time that night, about how much a person could reveal in the space of 5 silent seconds, and how rarely anyone stayed still long enough to let them.
It wasn't over.
Chapter 5, The Portrait. A single spotlight found the podium. Harold Ainsley, silver-haired, dressed for exactly this kind of moment, waited for the last murmur of conversation to die before he leaned into the microphone.
"Thank you all for a wonderful evening," he said. "Before we close, I have the privilege of making a special announcement."
Across the room, Eleanor lifted her champagne glass halfway to her lips, already smiling. Every announcement at a Camden Group gala had been about her for 6 years running. She had no reason to think tonight would be different. "As many of you know," Harold continued, "the Camden Group recently underwent a significant transition. 3 weeks ago, the company was acquired by Kestrel Holdings, one of the largest private investment groups on the East Coast." A murmur moved through the tables. Eleanor's glass stopped moving. She'd known about the acquisition. She'd signed off on parts of it herself. But the announcement wasn't supposed to happen here, tonight, in front of 700 people. It was supposed to happen next week, in a press release she'd already approved the language for. "Tonight," Harold said, "it's my honor to introduce the chairman of Kestrel Holdings, the man who now oversees every division of the Camden Group going forward, The screen behind the podium lit up. A portrait appeared, charcoal suit, calm eyes, a corner office with a skyline behind him that made the Belgrave's chandeliers look modest by comparison.
Please welcome Mr. Marcus Odom.
The room didn't applaud. For a moment, it didn't do anything at all. The only sounds left were the low electrical hum of the projector and the tick of a grandfather clock near the east doors. Sounds that had been there all evening, buried under conversation, now suddenly the loudest things in the building. Somewhere near the back, a glass paused on its way to someone's mouth and stayed there. Marcus watched Eleanor from his table before he stood. Watched the colour leave her face in a way that had nothing to do with the lighting. Watched her hand tighten around the stem of her glass until it trembled once, twice, and a single drop of champagne fell and spread into a small dark circle on the white cloth. He rose. He buttoned his jacket. He crossed the ballroom floor for what felt, to him, like the fourth and final time that night, though this time no one closed a circle against him, and no one turned away. He climbed the 3 steps to the stage and shook Harold's hand. It was the only handshake of the evening that had been returned. He stood at the podium and found Eleanor's face in the crowd. She was staring back at him with an expression that held every emotion a person can hold at once. And underneath all of it, the specific, sinking arithmetic of a woman realizing she had spent the last 2 hours insulting her own new boss in front of everyone she knew. "Good evening," Marcus said. His voice was the same voice he'd used all night, level, unhurried, not raised even now. "I'm Marcus Odom. I'm the new chairman of your parent company, and I want to say I've learned a great deal about this organization this evening, more than any quarterly report could have told me." He let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to.
I've seen how this company treats people it doesn't recognize. I've seen how it treats people it decides are beneath it. A pause, no longer than a breath. That changes starting tonight.
He didn't raise his voice for the last part. He didn't need to. He'd learned a long time ago that the quietest sentence in a room is usually the one people remember. He stepped down from the stage into applause that wasn't quite applause, scattered, uncertain, the sound of people who didn't know what else to do with their hands. He walked back toward his table, and it was only then that he understood, with total clarity, exactly why he had never once needed to raise his voice tonight. He had never been the one without power in this room.
He had simply been the only one who knew it. Eleanor was already moving, pushing back from her chair so fast it scraped against the marble, crossing the distance between them in 9 short, urgent steps.
Chapter 6. What the hand cost. Eleanor reached him before he sat back down. "Mr. Odom." Her voice cracked on the name. "Please, I had no idea who you were. If I'd known—" "If you'd known," Marcus repeated. He let the sentence hang there, unfinished, long enough for her to hear how it sounded out loud. "That's an interesting thing to say, Ms. Voss. Let me ask you something. If I'd been exactly who you thought I was, no title, no company, nobody, would tonight have been acceptable?" Eleanor opened her mouth. Nothing came out.
"You called me disgusting," Marcus said, quiet enough that only she and the few people closest could hear it. "You told me I didn't belong here. You threatened to have me dragged out. I didn't come tonight to test you, Ms. Voss. I came to do my job, but you tested yourself and the results were very clear."
Her eyes filled. Whether it was shame or fear or something more calculating, Marcus couldn't say, and didn't particularly need to. He took out his phone and dialed. 2 rings. "It's Marcus. I need legal on a call in 30 minutes. Full internal review of the Camden Group starting tonight. I'll send the scope over in the morning." He paused, listening. "Yes, effective immediately." He ended the call and looked at her. "You're suspended from your position. Effective now. You won't enter any Camden Group office or contact any employee until the review is finished.
You can't. I can, Marcus said. I just did.
He turned to the security chief standing a few feet away, the same man who, an hour earlier, had been told to keep quiet eyes on Marcus all evening. "Mr. Marsh, would you walk Miss Voss to her car?" Owen Marsh nodded once, his jaw tight, and stepped forward. He offered no opinion on the assignment, past or present. He simply did his job, and this time his job was walking Eleanor Voss past the tables, past the ice sculpture, past 700 people who would talk about this night for years, and out through the Belgrave's front doors. The doors closed behind her with a sound like the end of a sentence. Near the back of the room, the retired federal auditor from Table 11 set down his napkin, looked at his wife, and said nothing at all. The kind of nothing that meant he'd finally seen the end of something he'd been watching build for years. A few guests began clapping, unsure of what exactly they were applauding, and the sound spread thin and uneven across the ballroom before it faded out on its own. Marcus didn't wait for it to finish. He picked up his water glass, drank the last of it, and sat back down at the table nobody had wanted to share with him 3 hours earlier. Weeks later, a small brass button still sat in Marcus's desk drawer, off his father's old coat, never sewn back on. He caught himself reaching for it sometimes, mid-conversation, without meaning to. At the Camden Group, new hires had started knocking on office doors and waiting to be asked in, a habit nobody had ordered. 12 leadership positions remained open. Nobody had decided yet who they'd go to.